Hi, it's Rebecca. I'm here to answer all your questions about coffee. So here's how this is going to work. I'm going to tell you just a little bit about the benefits and the drawbacks of coffee, and then I'm going to answer the questions that you guys posted last night. And then after that, I'll be open to taking any additional questions. So first off, some of the benefits of coffee are a lowered heart disease risk. It slows the progression of Alzheimer's, and you have a 50% lower risk of Parkinson's. You also have a lower risk of malignant melanoma, a skin cancer, and liver cancer. And it's also really rich with antioxidants. So antioxidants inhibit oxidation, a chemical process that can produce free radicals. And free radicals in large amounts can be very harmful or cause damage to cells. Now, some of the drawbacks or risks of coffee are that there's really no mitigating effect on Parkinson's disease post-diagnosis. So once you have Parkinson's, it's not as if you get any sort of benefit by drinking more coffee. You don't alleviate any of the symptoms. You don't slow the progression like with Alzheimer's. Another risk is that caffeine in coffee raises your blood pressure. And it's not always safe for those people who have a history of high blood pressure. Maybe it's genetic, or maybe they just have a lifestyle that promotes high blood pressure. So, I mean, my mom actually, she can't drink a lot of coffee because she has that problem. So, also, some of the benefits are only experienced after 4 to 5 cups of coffee, and that's a lot of coffee. I don't even drink that much coffee, and I like my coffee. Now, those are the benefits and the drawbacks. So that's just a little synopsis. And now I'm going to get to taking your questions. And I've jotted down a little bit of the questions, but once I run out, feel free to drop some in the comments below. Let's see. So, Cladalist asks, decaf coffee, why? And I kind of agree with that because I'm not a fan of decaf, but there are some benefits to decaf. Some people like the taste of coffee, but they don't need the stimulatory effects. Like, they don't need any of the caffeine, or maybe they can't have it. Like I said, there is a risk with some people. Maybe it's nighttime and they don't want to stay up, they just want the taste. Or maybe they have anxiety and that's exacerbated by it. So there's a lot of reasons for decaf. I personally don't drink it, but if you like it, I mean, and as I said earlier, high blood pressure can also be a big deal. Let's see, what are some of the other questions? Got a piece of paper here with them. Let's see. How does coffee make you alert and productive? Okay, so to answer that question, we're going to take a look at how coffee, and specifically caffeine, works to keep you alert and help you stay alert. So, coffee is very structurally similar. The caffeine in coffee is very structurally similar to adenosine, a molecule that binds to adenosine receptors and promotes the induction of sleep. So since caffeine is so similar, it tricks you into thinking that you have adenosine on the receptors, and it binds those receptors. So the adenosine doesn't bind to the receptors, but the caffeine does, which tricks your brain into thinking, okay, there's adenosine, we can be sleepy, but you're not sleepy, because caffeine doesn't have the same effect. It just looks very structurally similar. And over time, the body will sense this, and the body will start to make more adenosine receptors. So your body will try to fight back and restore you to equilibrium, where you will be able to feel the effects that you had before you had the caffeine. But obviously that's not going to work because the caffeine has bound to the receptors and is blocking the action of adenosine. So over time, your body will make more adenosine receptors to try to counteract it. So when you don't have coffee, you might have a headache, you might feel fatigued, you might even feel a little bit sick. But yeah, it would be considered addictive because you would need more coffee over time, since you would need more caffeine to bind the adenosine receptors. And over time, you would need more. So yes, in short, coffee is addictive. But good news is, if you take a break, like you don't drink any coffee for 7 to 12 days, then you can kind of reset your brain. You can make your brain back to normal, more or less. You can drink maybe a cup or two of coffee per day, as opposed to maybe 5-6 cups of coffee. And 7 to 12 days is typically enough to mitigate that. So if you can go 7 to 12 days without coffee, you're my hero. Okay, let's see some of the other questions. Abigail JC asks, why does decaf still make me jittery? Okay, so decaf coffee is actually not entirely caffeine free. I know that sounds really weird, but decaf coffee is stripped of caffeine through processing, but since caffeine naturally occurs in coffee, you can never get rid of it entirely, so you're gonna have a very negligible amount of caffeine. I would venture to say that decaf makes you jittery not because of that tiny amount of caffeine, but your palate has probably grown accustomed to what coffee tastes like and what it does. So maybe your taste buds have equated the taste of coffee to, oh, well, I'm gonna get a stimulatory effect, I'm gonna be alert, so it could be a bit of a placebo in that sense. You could think that you drink the coffee, so your palate's like, oh, and now we get alert. You might be tricking yourself into being a little jittery. It could be a little bit of both. It could be you're very sensitive to caffeine, so the tiny amount could be affecting you, but probably more likely is that your palate equates it to a prior experience when it tastes the decaf, and it doesn't recognize entirely that it's just decaf and it's not supposed to make you alert. Okay, so see. Is the addictiveness of coffee a bad thing? JohnLuz.onc. Okay, so the fact that coffee is addictive is typically not a huge problem unless you go overboard. So if you drink above the FDA recommended limit, which is 400 milligrams of caffeine, say you drink 600 to 800 milligrams, and a cup of coffee is like 95 to 150 milligrams of caffeine. So 600, 800, that's like 6 to 8 cups of coffee. 400, that's like 4 cups. If you drink above 400, it's all very individual per person. I can drink a little more because I've been drinking it a while. But if you drink above 600 to 800 milligrams, typically that's when the addiction of caffeine and coffee in general can be a problem. That's where you start to get your headaches, you start to sometimes be a little nauseous, you basically experience withdrawal. So the fact that coffee is addictive has not really been a big problem for me, except when I go through time periods when I drink a lot. I'm a student, so I obviously drink coffee during finals. I mean, everyone swears by it, but I try to keep my caffeine intake under control because I have felt what happens when you drink too much, and it's not fun. So, in short, no, the addictiveness of coffee is not a huge problem, but it could be, so watch yourself. Okay, let's take a look at some more questions. Which is more effective, coffee or Red Bull? At Kristen M. Hovitt. So, coffee and Red Bull both have caffeine, obviously, but if by effective you mean best at keeping you alert, even though they both have caffeine, coffee has more caffeine. So, it's not a ton. Coffee is about 95 to 100 milligrams, 150 milligrams of caffeine, like I said. And that's per 8 ounces, depending on how you brew it. So if you brew it for a while, it might have more. If you brew it for not as long, it might have less. But Red Bull, an 8.4 ounce Red Bull, has about 80 milligrams, roughly. So which one's more effective? I would go with coffee, because you have to drink less coffee to get the same effects of the Red Bull. And even though the caffeine difference is not that big, I would say coffee is just better all around because it's more natural and it contains antioxidants. Like I talked about earlier, antioxidants are perfect to help you stay healthy because it fights oxidation. And yeah, I would say that coffee is definitely better, has antioxidants, and has a lot less sugar. So that coffee gets my vote. I'm biased, but coffee gets my vote. Is coffee addictive? Was already answered. Which roast is healthiest? In Science We Trust. Hey! So, The roast is determined by how long the coffee is roasted for. So a light roast or a blonde roast is toasted to the first crack of the bean. I'm not kidding. That's a phenomenon, the first crack. And the dark roast is typically roasted beyond the second crack, and first and second crack is exactly what you think. It's just when the beans crack. So it's basically time dependent. The longer you roast it, the darker the roast. And the current scientific research on the healthiest coffee roast would depend on the concentration of chlorogenic acid. And chlorogenic acid is a polyphenol compound found in coffee beans. Chlorogenic acid has been linked to lowered blood pressure, lower risk for diabetes and obesity, and it relieves oxidative stress on cells. So that's kind of a double whammy for the relief of oxidative stress. You have your caffeine, and then you have your chlorogenic acid. And in a 2017 study, it was found that the medium roast coffee had the highest concentration of chlorogenic acid. So medium roast, that's where it's at. Okay. Let's see, I have more questions. It's a matter of where are they? I wrote them down. Where did they go? That feeling when you can't find your questions. Okay. Well, I'm going to resort to my... Let's see, maybe I have it somewhere. When you get so many questions. Let's take some questions from the audience. Let's see. Anyone asking any questions? I will keep looking for the questions. I know I got more. Here we are, we found our questions. Let's see. Why does my body reject coffee? Wasaki 666. Coffee is typically higher in caffeine than a lot of drinks like tea. If you have black tea, it's about 45 milligrams. Coffee is 95 at the very least, so your body might reject it just because it's too strong for you. Some people are just not accustomed to that level of caffeine. I would say that's probably part of it. Let's see. Wasaki 666 also asked, are there alternatives to coffee that work in the same way? Yes, and tea, Red Bull, which I would probably not recommend over coffee, about the same concentration of caffeine, so I would probably say tea. Tea has its own benefits, so definitely would go with tea if you can't drink coffee. That's what my mom drinks, and she can't drink coffee. Let's see. Can coffee cause muscle spasms and twitches? At so-called expert. I like this question. So I have an anecdote on this. Around finals time, I was drinking a lot of coffee, and I was driving, and I found my optic nerve was very sensitive to too much coffee. And I found out it was because it increases your blood pressure. So if you have too much coffee, then your blood pressure could be a little too high. And I don't have problems with blood pressure, but I was starting to feel the effects of drinking too much, and it was not pleasant. It was like almost a blackout experience. My eyes were hurting and kind of throbbing, and I looked in the mirror, it looked like I was drunk. My eyes were red and they were watery. And I found that my optic nerve was twitching a lot, and I was drinking a lot of coffee, and I found that coffee, yes, can cause muscle spasms and twitches, but only if you drink a lot of it. Don't do that. Just don't do that. Let's see, more questions. Okay, so Salon Khan asks Salon Khan 330 asks something productive for students. I'm guessing is coffee productive for students? And yes, just don't abuse it. That's not a good idea. Okay, coffee better than tea, and why? At Princess Kun Bosch. Coffee is probably about comparable to tea, they just have different benefits. So whichever one you can handle better, coffee or tea, I would go for. They're both good, it's just one has less caffeine. So coffee is better at keeping you alert, but for health, coffee and tea are both healthy. It's just a matter of which one you opt for. Okay, Bots and Brains asks, neural antagonist to caffeine. So what is the neural antagonist to caffeine, and what makes a blonde roast special? So a blonde roast is a fancy way of saying just a light roast, and that means that you only toast it to the first crack of the bean. And a neural antagonist to caffeine is adenosine, because they're very structurally similar, but caffeine blocks it. Caffeine is an adenosine receptor antagonist. So the neural antagonist to caffeine would be adenosine. Let's see. Do we have any questions? Okay, well, there's a couple people watching. Does anyone have any questions before I exit live? Let's take a look. Thank you all for tuning in, by the way. This is actually our first Q&A session, and I feel like it's going very well, except for the losing questions thing. If anyone has any questions, feel free to ask them. If not, I will see you guys in the next Q&A. Okay, well, it's been fun. Thank you guys for tuning in, and make sure to drop us a comment, ask what you want to see next in a Q&A, what topic you want to see, and we'll get back with you, and maybe we'll even have a Q&A on it. So thank you for tuning in, and we hope to see you soon. So Science Health Fitness asks, is coffee making my body more acidic? And kind of. Not to the point where it would be detrimental to your health unless you drank a ton of it, but the average pH of a dark coffee, like black coffee, is about 5. And the average pH of the human body is about 7.4, and obviously 7 is like neutral. So yeah, it's definitely more acidic, but not significantly, so if you don't overdo it, you should probably be fine. But yeah, pH of black coffee is about 5, and pH of your body is 7.4, and if you drink a lot of it, yeah, you'd probably make your body more acidic, but that's why we don't drink too much. So our final question is about Kopi Luwak, a Vietnamese weasel coffee. So I had actually not heard of this before, but it's apparently very expensive. It's about $3,000 per pound. It's a lot of money. So Kopi Luwak is actually, it's made from the excretions of coffee beans from a civet, which is like a nocturnal cat, and they're fed coffee beans, but they excrete them, and then they make the coffee from their excretions, which does not sound very sanitary, but it's actually not a health risk. So the mechanism in the human body is fairly similar to coffee itself, it's very expensive. And if you can afford it, go for it. I've heard that it's very delicious. I've never had it, but it's extremely expensive, so sticking with regular coffee is probably your best bet.